One way of describing the quote-unquote problem of mind identification, or the problem of human suffering, or the problem of the illusion of division, separation, form, etc., is to say that there's an imbalance in the interplay of integration and disintegration. So this functions at all levels, this interplay. And the deeper realization goes, the more critical it is to be aware of this, whether it's energetic, intuitive, or even through knowledge. Knowledge is fine after the realization is clear, after the insight is clear. Knowledge can be quite helpful if it's proper knowledge. And proper knowledge means coming from someone who has had that realization and clarified it and integrated it. So this knowledge that when there's an imbalance between integration and disintegration, there's going to be some degree of suffering, some degree of discord, some degree of confusion, some degree of disorientation, and most importantly, energetically, some degree of fixation. To be free from this final fixation, to live where masculine and feminine, where integration and disintegration are not only in harmony and balance, they're in perfect synergy. And to even say that there is masculine and feminine, to even say that there is integration and disintegration as separate energies or movements or forces is not quite right. It's actually both the case that integration and disintegration are in harmony, balance, and synergy, and to say that they are not two different aspects at all. That would be, to me, a very deep, clear, and thoroughgoing understanding of no self and non-duality, such that integration and disintegration are in perfect harmony. And there's no fixation in either space or either direction. What this feels like is spontaneity, true spontaneity. And this is, I guess, if I was going to say what this is all about in the end, or what the experience, words are really difficult here, because anything I say will be misinterpreted to some degree and could easily be misinterpreted as not what I'm actually talking about. But the spontaneity is really where enlightenment has clarified. This is obvious in the Shin Ming, or the affirming faith and mind. In fact, maybe I'll read a bit of that, because it's just so well put in that. The great way is not difficult for those who do not pick and choose. When preferences are cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. And preferences goes so deep. The preference to be in control, the preference to be something, the preference to be nothing, the preference that what's actually occurring or what's appearing, the preference that could or should be different in any way at all. That's what's meant here. So when that's cast aside, the way stands clear and undisguised. It's very simple, very obvious, and undisguised. Right there, right here. No distinctions need to be made. No searching needs to be made. No rejection needs to be made. And you can't actually say anything about it that's fully accurate. And then it goes on to say, but even slight distinctions made set heaven and earth far apart. Exactly. I might even say heaven and hell. When you start to make distinctions, this is nothingness, or no one, or this is oneness, or I am everything. Both of these are views. What I'm pointing to is beyond any view. There's a beautiful sutta I was reading recently, maybe it was yesterday, where Buddha describes this very clearly, that he kind of, as the suttas tend to go, there's a list of things laid out that are these fixating thought patterns, essentially, or fixating beliefs. And he very clearly said the first two were that there is a self and that there is no self. These are both fixating beliefs. If you're using that as a view, if you're experiencing that as a view and reifying it, it can get very distorted, especially in deeper realization, especially beyond no self. So when I talk about no self realization, no self isn't something that stands on its own. It's not something actual. It's not. What it is a antidote. It's a clarifying pointer for a very deeply rooted and extremely common, ubiquitous among humans fixation. That's all it is. Once the antidote has been given, you don't need to take the antidote anymore. And if you do, it's not the antidote. What you're doing is you're sort of identifying with non-identity. You're identifying with no self. And that can be not only fixating, it can lead to all kinds of distortions like nihilism, right? Like avoidance, like misinterpretation of the nature of realization itself. So it's very important, especially in deeper realization. And how do you navigate this? I think it's being open to feedback. Sometimes it's even feedback from your quote unquote students, or if you don't think you're a teacher, then the people you interact with or whatever. Sometimes it's feedback from another deeply realized person. Sometimes it's feedback from a therapist. Like you may need to do work beyond no self-realization because it gets very, very easy in a sense to bypass without even noting you're doing it, right? So making a study of this, making a study of those pointers that do go very, very deep into realization and beyond the illusion of the separate self, like the Shin Shin Ming or affirming faith in mind, which I'm reading right here. These are very powerful pointers and they're very important, I think. So if you kind of stand alone in that realization without any feedback from anyone, you can get into some very distorted places. So I don't recommend that. Fixating in the disintegrative, fixating in the nothingness. There's nothing, there's no one, there's not even the slight form anywhere. There's nothing to relate to. There's no relationship. There's no nothing that's real. Then it gets into there's no spirituality. There's no path. There's no awakening. Like it becomes essentially nihilistic, right? And it's a philosophy. It may come from that philosophy may arise as a view with somebody who has deep realization, but the fixation is still there. The fixation, the view is still there. So this sutta I was talking about yesterday, Buddha was literally talking about how to move beyond view, how realization goes beyond all views. And he describes very clearly all the different views that we tend to fixate in. And as always, the clarity is pretty astounding. It's not just the way people thought 2,500 years ago. It's exactly how you think right now. And one of those is to overemphasize no self. So it's very important. And what that often feels like, again, is like a nihilistic, but it's also an ignoring of the integrative aspect. It's an ignoring of the luminous and radiant aspect, the aliveness that is right here. When those are in balance, there's nothing to avoid anymore. You don't need to avoid anything or people or anything. Right? There's not a reifying of others' energy versus mine and how that affects me. This is really important because this goes deep. Shin Shin Ming points to it very well, maybe more than anything I've ever read. I think Tozan's ranks are really good, but they're poetic and they require some interpretation, I think. This next line says, if you would clearly see the truth, discard opinions, pro and con, right? When it comes to spirituality, that spirituality kind of gives you everything you ever wanted and you can use it to, that's an opinion and that's sort of pro. Con is like, there is no spirituality, there is nothing, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do. That's kind of the opposite side of that. Those are both fixations. Those are opinions, essentially. And he's saying discard those. To founder in dislike and like is nothing but the mind's disease. This is realized at deeper and deeper levels, first with equanimity, with reactivity, then with resistance, and then with view, I would say. Those are the levels. And not to see the way's deep truth disturbs the mind's essential peace. Right. Beautiful. The mind isn't fundamentally fixating. The mind isn't fundamentally problematic. It's not fundamentally deluded, right? It has essential peace to it. The experience of even consciousness as such is deeply peaceful. Even a thought can be deeply peaceful. That's its sort of essence if we're talking about something like mind. It's dependently co-arising with other aggregates or whatever, but still the experience of it is rather peaceful. So we disturb that, or what disturbs it is belief, fixation, holding, taking sides, right? No matter what side it is. Then it says, the way is perfect like vast space. There is no lack and no excess. There's not too much and there's not too little. So simple. Our choice to choose and to reject, both are very important. To choose, to grasp, and to reject, aversion, avoidance. They prevent our seeing the simple truth. The truth is so simple. The truth, the living truth, this. This is very important. Both striving for the outer world, materialism, let's say, traditionally speaking or conventionally speaking, the mundane desires, I suppose, that's striving for the outer world, as well as for the inner void, where it's like we're striving for and even fixating in nothingness, which doesn't actually exist on its own. This condemns us to entangled lives. You can become entangled in nothingness. So both striving for the outer world as well as for the inner void condemn us to entangled lives. This is right on the money. Just calmly see that all is one, and by themselves false views will go. This is a little tricky to talk about, one, because it can be misinterpreted very easily. But the clarity of this writing is showing me that that's not what's being talked about here. The one is the luminous aspect. The one is the non-dual, the clear non-dual aspect. You can't just leave that behind with the realization of no self. It has to be in balance. You have to know this radiant nature so clearly that it leads to the spontaneity. There's nothing being collected. There's nothing moving from moment to moment. Not even a continuous energy, really. At the same time, the radiant luminosity here, the intimacy is beyond anything that the mind can perceive. And that's so beautiful. That's the one. So you could also say that the empty nature and the full nature are one. Okay. You could also say, and I like this probably the best, it's a term I'm borrowing from Dogen, which is total exertion. The universe comes forward. This is just the experience of it, right? You don't think this out as this is occurring, but it feels this way, just like right now, the sound of the voice, the sensation in the body, conventionally speaking, the body thing, right? I have to say that to point to something, but the sensation itself is the entire universe expressing. That's it. There is no remainder. There's nothing left over. Very important. No remainder means total intimacy. You could say that's interconnected. There's an interconnectedness that's obvious, but it's not things interconnected because there aren't things, and there's not a one somewhere that's like unity of the whole universe or something. It's not experienced that way. It's just known that there's a total exertion of all that is and all that isn't to make one sound. The intimacy is radical. It's beautiful, whether that's an ant crawling across the ground, whether it's a shadow on the sidewalk as you move, whether it's a glance at the sky, whether it's one breath, even a pain, a physical pain, an emotion. That's the total exertion. Yeah. So he says, just calmly see that all is one, and by themselves false views will go. This always comes down to view in the end. Any view held will lead to suffering, even subtle views, and maybe not so subtle views, but sort of radical views when it comes to realization. You do have to have those insights, the non-dual and no self insight, anatta. You have to have that, or you won't clarify in the deeper realms. Those require a very, very nuanced, sort of dedicated and relaxed and surrendered love for all that is and all that isn't, all that walks and crawls and breathes and all that doesn't. Remaining in duality, you'll never know of unity. Kind of goes without saying. And not to know this unity lets conflict lead you far astray. That's right. I love what Adyashanti said at some point. He said, when you realize non-separation, when you realize non-dual, when you realize that there is no actual separate one from me, you're kind of called on to live that. Do you live that? Do you actually live that way? Or do you live as if there is separation and boundaries, even though you don't experience them, which again can lead to avoidance, aversion, disassociation even, especially behavioral disassociation. So be aware of this. And then, this is very important, this is kind of pointing at what I'm talking about with not reifying nothingness, not reifying the empty nature. As a view, it says, but to assert that things are void also misses reality. There you go. I would agree with that. Now, the primary fixation of mind identification doesn't see the void nature, doesn't see the empty nature, doesn't see the essenceless nature. And so those teachings, those doctrines, and those insights and realizations are very important. Can't skip them. But you also can't attach to them in the end. You have to even let that go. The more you talk and think on this, the further from the truth you'll be. Well, yeah, these words are absurd, right? But I'm talking about experientially for you, period. Cut off all useless thoughts and words, and there is nowhere you cannot go. That is the beauty of interpenetration. It's beautiful. Sure, it's empty. And it's also radically, brilliantly full, intimate. Returning to the root itself, you'll find the meaning of all things. And this is the whole process. Like from the beginning to end, it's returning to the root. Look for the root. Ultimately pluck up the root. And then you'll find there's no source apart from the dissolution. That they are interwoven, just like integration, disintegration. Awakening is to go beyond both emptiness as well as form. Yes, yes, yes. All changes in this empty world seem real because of ignorance. So beautiful. You see, like nothing even changes. But you're not reifying changelessness either. You don't need to do that. Don't fixate, right? It all comes down to, I should actually do a talk on the sutta I was reading yesterday. It's so good. Yeah. But it's ultimately just Buddha pointing people past views of any kind. And he doesn't give you, okay, here's the proper view. There can be proper views early on, like the Eightfold Noble Path has, like, there can be helpful views in the relative. But when we're talking about deep realization, he pushes you or points you beyond all view. Because at some point you will see that's the mechanism, is view. The mechanism of illusion. Okay? Do not go searching for the truth. Just let those fond opinions go. Again, same recommendation. Abide not in duality. Refrain from all pursuit of it. If there's a trace of right and wrong, true mind is lost, confused, distraught. From one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. From one mind comes duality, but cling not even to this one. So that my interpretation of that would be the initial insight, the realization of unbound consciousness, which is a big deal usually. It's a big deal experience. It's a big deal as far as insight's concerned. No matter how it happens, whether it seems like it comes with fireworks or not, doesn't matter. The insight itself is a big deal, and you'll know it. You'll know it's a big deal even if you don't have a big experience with it or something. But he's saying, do not cling even to this one, because realization goes beyond that initial insight. When this one mind rests undisturbed, then nothing in the world offends. Now, you're still in the relative in one sense. There's still a body mind, right? You still have to pay rent, eat. You still have relationships. Most people will. You'll still have careers of some kind. Most people will, right? When one mind rests undisturbed, then nothing in the world offends. This is so powerful. The body-mind experiences consciousness as a sort of sense gate, even in deep realization, even beyond the self-structure, the illusion of self-structure. That stabilizing in consciousness can be really, really helpful. The luminous aspect of consciousness can be really, really helpful to soften any remaining resistance or polarity that you may not be aware of. And by definition, if it's a view, you can't be fully aware of it. You can suspect it. You can see it in part. You may get it reflected back to you by another person. Inquiry may lead you to unblocking that fixation, but you won't really see the view until you're past it, until it's dropped away. Then it's obvious what it was. I love this when it says, when no thing can give offense, then all obstructions cease to be. unobstructed, freed from delusive hindrance, as it says in the Heart Sutra. That's the spontaneity I'm talking about. You've all tasted it. Everyone has tasted it for moments, sometimes longer periods. When you're a child, when you have an awakening, often you taste it for weeks to months, right? All obstructions cease to be. And then the beauty of after awakening is you're shown back through all of the conditioning patterns, the fixations, the energetics of it all, to see where that fixation has been arising, to see where the obstructions were forming and why. And at some point, they don't form anymore. Svaha. If all thought objects disappear, the thinking subject drops away. Again, it's fascinating how he puts this all together. He or she or whoever. I don't know who wrote this. I'm not sure we really know, but I think they attribute it to one of the patriarchs. But doesn't mean we know who actually wrote this. But anyway, there's jumping around. So this is referring really to the experience of unbound consciousness in my experience. Like this would be something that's realized very, very clearly with an awakening. When all thought objects disappear, the thinking subject drops away. There's no subject or object in consciousness, just consciousness. And that's a very sort of sublime experience, actually. For things are things because of mind, and mind is mind because of things. And this is pointing directly to dependent origination. Again, another, you could call it a Buddhist doctrine, but it's also often realized directly in this clear understanding of how the sense of a self apart arises simultaneously with the object of thought. They're dependently co-arising, and neither one exists on its own. Neither one really exists. To see that clearly, these two sections make sense. For the things are things because of mind, mind is mind because of things. All thought objects disappear, the thinking subject drops away. Isn't that beautiful? These two are merely relative, and both at source are emptiness. Emptiness doesn't mean nothingness, by the way, in this doctrine in Buddhism. So just be aware of that. In emptiness, these are not two, yet in each are contained all forms. Once coarse and fine are seen no more, how can there be taking sides? Yeah, coarse and fine is really a nice pointer, because we can stop fixating in one aspect and then fixate in another without even knowing it. So we could fixate in the fine because we've negated the coarse, for instance. The great way is without limit, beyond the easy and the hard. Yes. So if anyone tells you this is a hard process, it's arduous, takes years, lifetimes, that's a fixation. If someone tells you there is no process, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do it, there's no point in inquiry because who's going to do that, that's also a fixation. This is exactly what this line means. The great way is without limit. It's without limit, so wherever you are is the right place. Your entry point is the right entry point. It doesn't go like Angelo said. It doesn't go like Adyashanti said. It doesn't go like Violet said. It doesn't go like a certain way. It goes how it goes for you, right? Because there's no limit. There's no limitation to this. And it is beyond the easy and the hard. Can you let go of those concepts? Can you let go of how you're bringing those concepts on board and turning them into your story about realization? Oh, I can't wake up. Or I'm not the kind of person that wakes up. It's just a slow process for me. Or, or I did have an awakening. I'm trying to recreate it. Like, these are fixations. These are stories based on limitation. When you see clearly that limitation is not a thing, then the interpenetration is clear, easy, obvious, direct. Spontaneity is clear and obvious, and intimacy is undeniable. Okay, I think I'll hold up doing the rest because this is actually a pretty long reading. Maybe I'll do more of it later if people enjoyed this. All right, y'all have a good day.